Montana Territory, September 1878. The first snow had not yet fallen, but the wind sweeping over the dry plains near Red Fern Creek bit like winter teeth. Wrapped in a thin wool shawl, Rowena James stood beside the stagecoach that had left her like unwanted freight, boots sinking into the dirt, her letter still clutched in her hand. Mr. Henry Ward, age 43, ranch owner, financial means secure. Seeking loyal, God-fearing woman for marriage. Letter correspondence had been polite, promising. She had memorized his words by firelight in Georgia. But he never came. A boy no older than 10 had delivered the news from behind the general store's broken porch rail. He died 2 weeks ago. Fever took him. We do not need another mouth around here. Then the townspeople turned cold, turned cruel. No one offered her shelter. No one offered her work. They looked at her like something rotted had washed up from the riverbed. 3 days she had waited. Sleep on a church pew, a crust of bread from the schoolteacher's pity. But when the pastor told her not to return again, you are not his widow. You are no one's burden, she knew she had to get out. Rowena's fingers trembled as she folded the letter. Her wedding dress, still wrapped in oilskin, was tucked under her arm. She had no money, no family left, and no idea where the trail might lead. The wind kicked up dust. Across the street, a man stepped out of the blacksmith's shed, wiping his hands on a rag. He was tall and lean, maybe 30, and his dark blonde hair stuck out from under a battered hat. He did not look away like the others. He looked at her. She turned to go, head down. "Miss." His voice came low and careful. "You all right?" Rowena stopped. She had not heard kindness in days. "I am not your concern, sir," she said, soft but steady. The man crossed the street anyway, boots scuffing the dirt. "Name's Zeke Fallow. I got a small ranch west of here. Not much, but I got a roof, firewood, and coffee. You look like you could use all three." She looked up at him then. His face was sun-worn, his eyes a deep brown that held no pity. Just quiet concern. "Honest, you do not even know me." He gave a tired shrug. "Town did not look too fond of you. I figure that says more about them than you." Rowena stared at him. A week ago, she had sold her mother's brooch to pay for the last leg of the stage. She had left everything behind. And now this stranger, with dust on his coat and calluses on his hands, was offering her something no one else had. A chance. "I am Rowena James," she said, voice stiff with the effort of holding back tears. "I came to marry a man who died before I arrived." Zeke nodded once. "That is hard luck. I am sorry." She nodded too, and when he turned and started walking, she followed. Zeke's homestead was 5 miles west, past a low ridge of scrub pine and a dried-up creek. The house was small, one room with a loft overhead and a lean-to barn. A chestnut mare nickered from the fence line. He made no fuss, put water on the stove, handed her a wool blanket, and let her sit near the hearth. She caught him glancing at her as he pulled potatoes from a sack and sliced them into a pan. "You live out here alone?" she asked. "I got 2 boys," he said after a beat. "Kellen is 8. Corey is 6. They are with my sister in Missoula while I get the roof patched and the stove fixed for winter." Rowena's eyes widened. "You are a father?" "Was married. Kate died 3 winters back. Fever too." She looked down at the flickering fire. "I am sorry." Zeke stirred the pan with a quiet hand. "Me too." That night he offered her the bed. She refused. He insisted. She curled up under thick quilts, the scent of pine sap and old smoke in the air. He slept in a chair by the door, rifle laid across his lap. In the morning, she started a fire before he woke, made weak coffee and washed the tin cups. He watched her silently, then nodded once. "You can stay for now, just until you figure what comes next." She met his eyes. "I will earn my keep." He nodded again. "I know." Days passed. She helped mend the fence, pick the last of the late apples, and scrub soot from the hearth. At night, they ate by lantern light. He told her about his boys, how Kellen liked to chase frogs and Corey always asked why the stars moved. She listened, smiling for the first time in weeks. One afternoon, she found him in the shed sawing timber. "You are building something?" He nodded. "Adding a room. Boys will be back by snowfall." "They outgrew that loft 2 years ago." She hesitated, then asked, "And me?" He looked at her, saw the worry behind her words. "You need a place too. I figure you might stay." Rowena's throat tightened. "You do not even know me." Zeke set the saw down. "I know what it feels like to be left behind. I know you work hard. And I know the boys will need someone who knows how to keep calm when the wind howls." She blinked, startled. "I ain't asking you to marry me," he said. "Not unless you want to. But I can offer you a life. An honest one." Her chest ached. "Not from grief this time. From hope. I do not want to be alone anymore," she whispered. He stepped closer, slow and steady. "Then do not be." Rowena looked up at him, her heart thudding hard. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, fingers rough but gentle. She leaned into his touch without thinking. "Zeke," she breathed. "I will take care of you," he said. "If you will let me." She nodded once. Then, for the first time since she stepped off that stagecoach, Rowena smiled. And he smiled back. A thin crust of frost clung to the porch rail by the time Zeke stepped outside, the morning still as a held breath. Rowena stood near the chopping block with his work gloves hanging loose on her hands. She was splitting kindling, not fast, but careful, her whole frame focused. He watched her for a moment before crossing the yard, boots crunching in the frozen grass. "You do not have to do that," he said, eyeing the growing pile. Rowena didn't look up. "I know, but I want to." He leaned against the fence beside her. "That stack's enough for 2 nights. She set the axe down, tugged the gloves off, and looked at him with a steadiness that gave him pause. "I never learned how to be idle. Even when I was a girl, there was always laundry or corn to shuck or someone sick to sit with. I'm no good at standing still." He nodded once. "You're not the only one." They walked back toward the house in silence. Inside, the stove crackled and the smell of sourdough starter drifted warm through the room. She'd started it the night before from memory, humming under her breath while she mixed flour and water with the patience of someone used to making do. He hadn't asked her to, but he hadn't stopped her either. Over breakfast, he poured coffee and watched her eyes trace the outlines of the cabin walls, measuring the space like she was sketching something in her mind. "You thinking of changing something?" he asked. Rowena set her tin cup down. "Not without asking. But I notice the corner near the window gets the best light by mid-morning. If there's spare muslin and a needle, I could sew some curtains. It'd keep the wind from sneaking in too." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "There's some fabric in the chest by the loft ladder. Kate never got around to using it." Rowena's gaze held his, quiet but respectful. "I won't touch it unless you're sure." "I'm sure," he said. That afternoon, he hitched the wagon and asked if she wanted to come with him to check the far fence line. She agreed without hesitation, pulling on her shawl and braiding her hair against the wind. The ride was long, the trail rutted from late summer storms, but she didn't complain. Her eyes stayed alert, scanning the land like she was learning it piece by piece. "You always been in Georgia?" he asked as they passed a grove of dying aspens. "Since I was small. My folks moved after the war, started over with a pig and a patch of tomatoes. When they died, I stayed. Didn't have much reason to leave till the letter came." Zeke held the reins loose, letting the horses pick their pace. "And before Georgia?" She hesitated, then said, "Virginia, near Wytheville. My father was a cooper. Lost a hand during the last campaign. After that, he carved toys for the neighbors' children. Said it kept his mind from dark places." He nodded slowly. "My pa was a wheelwright. Drank himself to death in a dugout outside Helena. Left me nothing but a name and a pair of boots too big to fit." Rowena looked over at him. "You made your own way." "So did you." They reached the fence line near dusk. Zeke jumped down and walked the posts, checking wire and wood. She stayed by the wagon, watching the way he moved, deliberate, without waste. He didn't talk unless there was something worth saying. She appreciated that. On the way back, the wind picked up. She pulled her shawl tighter, teeth chattering faintly. "You cold?" he asked. "I'll manage." He didn't press her. Instead, he stopped the wagon and reached under the bench for the old buffalo robe. Handed it to her without a word. She took it, wrapped it around herself, and sat a little closer. Thank you, she said after a long pause. He glanced at her, the corner of his mouth lifting just slightly. You're welcome. By the time they returned, the stars were out and the chimney smoked steady against the dark. He gave the horses grain while she lit the lamp and stirred the stew she'd set on the back of the stove that morning. They ate quietly, the warmth between them something unspoken but alive. Later, when she stood by the window stitching the edge of a curtain, he watched her hands work, thread pulling smooth through the cloth. You think you'll stay? He asked finally. She didn't look up right away. Then she said, I don't know anything for certain. But this place. It doesn't feel like I'm waiting to be turned away. He crossed the room, not close, just near enough for her to hear him clearly. You don't have to wait for anything. Not here. She looked at him then, eyes steady. I don't want to be a guest. You aren't. The thread in her hand paused. I don't want to be a charity case either. You're not that either. She swallowed once. Then what am I? Zeke's voice stayed low. You're someone I'd like to build a life with. If you want the same. Rowena didn't answer right away. But she didn't turn away either. Her hands lowered to her lap, cloth forgotten. That's not something I say lightly, she said. I know. A long silence passed, but it wasn't hollow. It was full of something waiting to bloom. I'm not afraid of work, she said at last. But I'm afraid of being alone again. You don't have to be. She nodded once, then turned back to the curtain and threaded another stitch. One after the other, neat and firm. Beside her, Zeke stayed near, and the quiet between them stretched wide and warm like a promise. By late October, the morning light came slower, and the air inside the cabin carried the bite of coming snow. The boys were due back in less than a fortnight. Zeke had finished the new room just in time, hammering the last board into place as the wind howled through the cottonwoods. Rowena stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her cheeks flushed from tending the stove. She'd been quieter since Zeke mentioned the boys' return, less certain in her movements, more cautious in her speech. He noticed. He always noticed. You think they'll take to me? She asked one evening, her voice barely louder than the flame behind the stove glass. Zeke leaned back in his chair, boot heels planted wide. They're boys. They'll test the water, sure. But they'll see what I see. She didn't ask what that was. Just looked down at her hands, where a bit of flour clung to her knuckle from the biscuits they'd eaten. They lost their mother, she said. That kind of wound doesn't close like a cut. He studied her profile, the way her jaw tightened when she thought too long on something. You're not here to replace her. Just be who you are. I don't know who that is anymore, she said, quieter still. I came out here to be a wife. I ended up a stranger in someone else's home. Zeke leaned forward, elbows on his knees. This place hasn't felt like a home in a long while. Not till you were in it. Her eyes flickered up to his and he saw something shift, something small but certain. I've never raised children, she admitted. Only helped with cousins now and again. I wouldn't know how to mend a scraped knee or talk through a nightmare. You listen, he said. You pay attention. That's most of the work. She exhaled, her shoulders softening. And the rest? Zeke offered a half smile without teeth. You learn as you go. The wagon from Missoula arrived just after midday, creaking under the weight of 2 boys, a trunk, and a sack of dried apples from his sister. Kellen climbed down first, lanky and sun-browned, his face set in a wary squint. Corey followed, shorter and rounder, dragging a stick behind him like a sword. Zeke met them at the gate. That roof's patched. Stove's holding heat. You boys ready? Kellen nodded once. Corey was already peering past him toward the smoke curling from the chimney. Inside, Rowena waited, hands folded tight in front of her apron. She hadn't braided her hair that day, left it loose at her shoulders like she didn't want to present herself as anything she wasn't. Zeke hadn't told her what to say, and she hadn't asked. The boys stepped in and stopped short. This is Miss Rowena, Zeke said. She's been helping around here while you were gone. Kellen's gaze flicked to her, then to his father, then back again. Corey just tilted his head. You make biscuits? Corey asked. Rowena blinked. I do. He nodded solemnly like she'd passed some unspoken test, then wandered toward the table. Kellen stood still another moment, then offered a small, stiff nod. I built you both beds, Zeke said. Room's got shelves now, too. Kellen gave the faintest smile. Better than that old loft. Later that night, after the boys were washed and tucked in, Rowena sat on the porch step pulling her shawl tight as the moon rose over the ridge. Zeke came out with 2 tin mugs, handed her one. Steam curled upward, catching the moonlight. "They're good boys," she said. "They'll come around," he replied. "They already have." Zeke sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder. "You held your own. I didn't do much. You stayed. That counts." She looked out across the yard where the frost was silvering the fence rails. "I didn't think I'd be part of anything again," she said, voice low. "I thought I'd just survive day by day." Zeke didn't speak, just sipped his coffee and waited. "But this," she went on, "this feels like something being built. Something that might last." He reached over, not rushed, and let his hand rest over hers. Her fingers curled around his without hesitation. "I want you here," he said. "Not just because you help. Or because I'm tired of being alone. I want you here because when you're near, this place feels steady." Rowena turned to look at him, her eyes catching the light from the window behind them. "I want to stay. For real this time." Zeke's thumb brushed the ridge of her knuckles. "Then stay." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat like that, the silence easy between them, the night wind rustling the dried grass in the pasture. Inside, a floorboard creaked as one of the boys turned over in sleep. Rowena closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was waiting for the world to fall out from under her. She was already home. The first snow came before dawn, soft and soundless, laying a pale hush over the yard. Kellen and Corey pressed their faces to the window pane, breath fogging the glass as they watched flakes drift past the eaves. Rowena set an extra log on the fire and pulled the boys' coats from the peg by the door. "If you want to help your father feed the stock, you'll need these." Kellen took his without a word, already slipping into the rhythm of the place. Corey hesitated, then asked, "You coming too?" She smiled gently. "Not this time. I've got bread rising." Zeke stepped in from the barn with snow dusting his shoulders. "Breakfast first. Then we'll make sure the water troughs aren't frozen solid." Once the boys had eaten and clattered out behind Zeke, Rowena stood alone in the quiet cabin, the scent of yeast and wood smoke wrapping around her. She pressed her hand to the dough, felt its warmth rising beneath her palm. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It held the shape of people, of life being lived. She hung the last of the curtains in the boys' room that morning, her stitches even, the muslin washed soft. She left the window open a crack to let the cold air chase out the smell of fresh paint. Kellen had already stacked 3 books on the shelf Zeke had built. One had a pressed feather tucked between the pages. She hadn't asked about it. Some things weren't meant to be explained. When the men returned, boots caked in snow and cheeks red with wind, Rowena handed Corey a bowl of warm water and a cloth. "You wash up first, then your brother." Kellen raised a brow. "Why him first?" "Because he's smaller and he's shivering," Rowena said, wiping her floury hands on her apron. Zeke leaned a hip against the table, watching the exchange. She's got a point. That night, after the boys had gone to bed, Zeke poured water into the basin by the stove and began scrubbing the mud from his hands. Rowena sat nearby, mending the hem of a worn shirt he'd left balled in the corner. "Where'd you learn to sew like that?" he asked, glancing sideways. "My aunt used to make quilts for the whole county," she said, knotting the thread. "She'd whip my ankles with her thimble if I ever left a seam crooked." He chuckled low in his throat. "Sounds like she kept order." "She did, until her eyesight went. After that, I kept her stitches straight for her." Zeke dried his hands and sat across from her. "You ever think about quilting again?" Rowena looked up, surprised. "I haven't had reason to." "Well," he said, slow and thoughtful, "I've got some of Kate's old scraps in a crate out in the shed, if you wanted to pick through them." She set the shirt aside. "Are you sure? I wouldn't bring it up if I wasn't." She nodded, the gesture small but sure. "I'd like that." The lamp flickered as the wind shifted outside. Zeke leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I've been thinking," he said after a pause, "about what comes next." Rowena met his gaze. "What are you thinking?" "I've got land enough. And with the boys back, it's time things settle for good. If you're willing, I'd like to make this official." She didn't move, didn't blink. You mean marriage? I do. Her breath caught, but not from fear. You sure this isn't just about needing help? He shook his head once. I could hire a cook if that's all I needed. But I don't want a cook. I want you. I like the way you see things. The way you move through this place like you belong here already. Rowena folded her hands to still their tremble. I didn't think I'd ever get asked again. I'm not asking out of pity. This is a life I want to build with you. Not because I lost someone, but because I found something worth holding on to. She stood then, slowly, walked to where he sat and placed her hand over his. I want it too, she said. Not because I need safety, but because this feels like the right thing at the right time. Like it was waiting for both of us to be ready. Zeke turned his hand to thread their fingers together. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of breath and promise. I'll ride into town tomorrow, he said. Fetch the preacher. Rowena nodded, eyes shining but dry. I'll start a new dress. He traced the back of her hand with his thumb. You already look like you belong here. She leaned down, kissed the corner of his mouth, slow and certain. Outside, the snow continued falling, soft as grace. Inside, the warmth gathered and held. The preacher arrived 2 days later, coat flapping in the wind, his mare sweat lathered from the climb through the pass. He nodded to Zeke, then tipped his hat to Rowena with a wary respect that told her he'd been warned this wasn't a church affair. I'm not here for ceremony, she said, brushing flour from her sleeves. Just a beginning. Zeke set the bench near the hearth. The boys stood quiet, hair damp from washing, Kellen's shirt tucked in neat, Corey's boots mismatched. Rowena wore her new dress, undyed cotton, simple and clean. She hadn't added lace or trim. She didn't need to. When the preacher opened his book, Zeke reached for her hand. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. She looked up at him and saw no hesitation. Only the same quiet strength that had carried her in from the edge of things. I do, he said, voice low but firm. She didn't waver. I do. Corey clapped once before remembering himself. Kellen elbowed him, but not hard. The preacher smiled, closed his book, and left them with a nod and a prayer fit for the honest work of living. Afterward, Rowena ladled stew into bowls while Zeke poured cider warmed with cloves. They ate by firelight, the boys asking questions now with more ease. Will you still make biscuits? Corey asked, spearing a piece of carrot. Rowena nodded. And pies when the apples dry right. Kellen looked at Zeke. Can we show her the creek? Zeke leaned back. Tomorrow, if the snow holds off. Rowena reached for the kettle. I'll pack bread. After the boys had gone to bed, Zeke stood at the threshold of the new room, watching the shadows shift over the plank floor. Rowena came up beside him, her candle casting a soft rim of gold across his jaw. They slept easy, she said. They know they're safe. He turned to face her fully. So do I. She touched his chest, just above his heart. You've built something solid here. So have you. He held her gaze, then dipped his head and kissed her slow, like every promise they'd made deserved its own breath. She rested her forehead against his, and he wrapped both arms around her, drawing her close into the quiet. Snow fell again the next morning, light and steady. They walked to the creek bundled in wool, the boys' laughter ringing through the trees. Kellen skipped stones near the bend while Corey hopped from bank to bank, boots wet within minutes. Rowena sat on a flat rock, the basket beside her, Zeke lowering himself to join her. He took a slice of bread, chewed thoughtfully, then glanced sideways. What would you want to plant come spring? She considered. Beans, maybe some cabbage, something that fills a table without fuss. He nodded. We've got the land. Could fence off the south strip. Gets good sun. Her eyes lingered on the boys. And maybe a row of sunflowers. For them. Zeke followed her gaze. They'd like that. That night, Rowena stitched a square of muslin into the start of a quilt. She sat near the fire, her feet tucked beneath her, the boys asleep behind the closed door of their new room. Zeke read from a tattered volume of poetry, his voice low, the words slow and careful, like he was tasting each one before it left his tongue. When she finished her square, she crossed to him and set it in his lap. "It's the first," she said. "I'll add a piece every month." He ran a thumb over the seams. "Will you teach the boys? If they want to learn, they will." He set the book aside and pulled her gently into his lap. She rested her head against his shoulder and he wrapped his arms around her waist. "I never thought peace would look like this," she said. "It's not always loud," he murmured. "Sometimes it's just a warm fire and someone to lean on." She tilted her head up, kissed the place beneath his jaw where the stubble softened. "I'll stay," she whispered. "Not just for tonight. For the long road." "You're not alone anymore," he said, fingers brushing the curve of her spine. "I know," she whispered, and she did. Years passed. The boys grew tall and broad-shouldered, learned to mend harness and read the land. Kellen joined Zeke in the spring drives, rifle across his back, as sharp as his father's. Corey built a coop from scrapwood and raised hens that followed him like kin. Rowena's sunflowers bloomed taller each season, lining the path to the creek where she taught the boys to fish, and Zeke often paused to kiss her cheek when no one was looking. The quilt grew too, square by square, stories stitched into every corner, scraps of old shirts, flour sacks, and the hem of her wedding dress. One winter evening, after the cattle had been brought down from the higher meadow and the barn doors were barred against the wind, Zeke stood at the window watching the storm build over the ridge. Rowena came to stand beside him, her shawl pulled close, a new line of gray at her temple. "We've done well," he said. She reached for his hand. "We've done right." He turned to her, touched her cheek with reverence. "You still want more?" She smiled, soft and full. "Only time. And mornings like this." He kissed her then, deep and sure, and she leaned into it like she always had, like she'd come home from a long road and meant never to leave again. Outside, the snow piled high, but inside the cabin it was warm. A fire burned steady, the kettle sang low, and two hearts beat in rhythm, unshaken by the years. They had built a life. And it was good.